I want to talk to you a little bit about what is happening with Israel in the world, also in the United States. And to do that, I want to back up a little bit, maybe 20 years or so. The last 20 years, it was kind of easy to support Israel, at least in some sectors. In the United States, it was even popular to support Israel. And, the second intifada began to fade. The trauma from that began to fade somewhat. What most people don't realize is that the attacks didn't stop. The Israelis just got better at stopping them. And in fact, I had contacts in Israel who used to tell me on a regular basis how many attacks they were stopping that day. And sometimes it was 25, 30 attacks a day that they were stopping. And so, we got used to a more peaceful situation in Israel, and people began to come and they would go to the beach, and things became comfortable. And the same was true for the Gaza envelope. We have friends, my wife and I, we have very good friends who lived in Kibbutz Alamim, and they were telling us, that the Israeli government got very good at penetrating the tunnels, and they had radar that could tell you where the tunnels were, and they began to be very good at stopping those attacks there, to the extent that the Israeli government began to pull out forces from the Gaza envelope. There was actually a much larger force there about 10 years ago, and they pulled many of those forces back because they were so confident that they knew what was going on, that they were safe, right? And our friend in Kibbutz Alamim, he used to be in the elite army units in Israel, and he was the head of security there. And for the first, 10 years that he lived there, he was always telling us, wow, we, caught a guy with a knife who was coming to attack the children in the kindergarten or things like this. And then after some time, those things stopped. And they began to feel very safe. And in fact, they were part of the community that was really looking to build a bridge with the Palestinians in Gaza to bring them into Israel for medical care and things like this. But then there was the Saturday of October the 7th. And I remember seeing some things on the news, and we texted our friend, what's going on? It took him an hour or so to respond, and he said, I'm fighting. And then we realized it was something serious. And, these are people we grew up with. Sorry, I'm a little emotional. He has 4 girls and 1 boy, and they spent something like 18 hours that day in their room. And he was fighting that whole day. And a few weeks ago, I went to see him, and he was still severely PTSD'd from that day. And 2 of his girls were so PTSD'd, they're having trouble functioning. And I realized that we shifted into a new era, because not only did that attack happen, as we've talked about and as we saw last night, but we saw things in the aftermath of that attack that we had never seen before, that I didn't imagine in the United States. I thought, okay, that's for some other countries. We saw students being attacked on their campus. We saw Jews being attacked in the streets. There was a case of a Jewish man who was killed in Los Angeles, who was part of a demonstration. They beat him on the head to death. In the United States, for me, that was unbelievable. We didn't think that this could happen. And I saw then the world, including people in the United States, coming down on Israel in a way that I just couldn't understand. These people had just survived such a horrific attack. Whatever the final number was, it was 1,200 and some that were killed. What most people don't realize is that, another few thousand were injured, and so many more were traumatized by the attack. And this, as we heard last night, this was such everyone knows someone who was going through this. And as I saw the response, and as I saw what was happening, especially on the campuses and with the young people, and even young people in the church, I began to understand we have a real problem. There's a real disconnect, and there's a deception happening on a widespread basis, that so many people are deceived about what is actually going on. I have good friends, a very good friend actually, someone that I work with in business, who came to me and he said, I understand, what happened on October 7th, but do you really think it's necessary that Israel's fighting in Gaza the way they are? There's so many children dying, and I'm seeing these figures, and so I began to ask him some questions. Well, what figures are you reading? Well, this is what, whatever, Reuters or whoever was saying the number of Palestinian children that were dying. And I asked him, I said, well, where do you think Reuters got that number? Oh, I don't know. Well, they got it from the Hamas Information Service. Do you think that's an accurate number? Well, probably not. Okay, so why do you think that they're fighting in this way? Well, I don't know. And I said, well, they have to stop Hamas really once and for all. They have to stop the ability of Hamas to come in and do again what they were doing. I remember I was there. In fact, I've been in Gaza years ago. And I remember one of my mentors in Israel, his name was Benny Alon. He was in Ariel Sharon's cabinet during the time that Israel was pulling out of Gaza. And I remember he was telling me, if we pull out of Gaza, they will build an army there, and in 10 or 20 years, they will attack us. That's exactly what happened. In fact, he was so against the pullout that Ariel Sharon was having a cabinet meeting, and to have the cabinet vote to approve the Gaza pullout plan, I think a quorum had to meet, or a certain number of cabinet ministers had to meet, and Benny and a few others, they were hiding from being served the notice to be at the cabinet meeting. So for 2 weeks or so, he delayed the cabinet meeting by running around hiding from the notice from Sharon, because he was so confident that this is what would happen. And so I began to see this last year and a half that we are living in a new era. It's similar to what I felt after the COVID pandemic. I've traveled extensively for my business. I used to do about 100 international trips a year. And, COVID was the first time in my life that I heard of, even in times of war, that all of a sudden you couldn't travel anymore. I realized we're in a different time. All of a sudden, we're now in a time where maybe I'm away from home and I can't get home. And the same thing I felt after October 7th. We're now in a time where I was thinking, maybe there were 10 terrorists who got into Israel that day. And when I heard that there were thousands of terrorists that got in, I couldn't comprehend it. It was something new. It's a different time. And then to see the response of the world, I realized we were living in a different time. And so what I really wanted to talk about today was, in this time, in this new era, it's really time to really connect again with the why of why we support Israel. And as a Christian, that I can't talk about the why without talking about the spiritual, because God is the God of Israel. It's literally in the Bible, he's called the God of Israel all over the place. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So what is God doing with Israel? That was the question I was pondering and asking myself. And really what he's doing today is the same thing that he was doing 3,000 years ago. He is making himself known in the world through Israel. And, we can go back to, for instance, the story of the Tower of Babel. In the Bible, the Bible describes God as making all the nations there at the Tower of Babel. But out of all the nations, he chose one nation for himself, Israel. And why did he do that? To be a light unto the nations. So from that time on, he was making himself known throughout Israel. And you can read that through so many prophecies in Isaiah and Zechariah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah. So many times the phrase is repeated, and then the world will know that I am God. And I think that we are in a time where we really have to reconnect with that, because it's actually part of who God is being the God of Israel. And if we reject that part from him, we're actually rejecting part of who God is and who he says he is and who we are in believing in him. So how can we know God's heart without knowing God's heart for Israel? I wanted to read a scripture from Jeremiah chapter 3, verses 14 through 17. And it says, "Return, faithless people, declares the Lord, for I am your husband. I will choose you, one from a town and two from a clan, and bring you to Zion. Then I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding. In those days, when your numbers have increased greatly in the land, declares the Lord, people will no longer say, the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It will never even enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another one be made. At that time they will call Jerusalem the throne of the Lord, and all the nations will gather in Jerusalem to honor the name of the Lord. A throne? A throne is a place where a ruler sits. This verse is talking about God residing in Jerusalem with the people of Israel, and that is how the world will be known, or that he will be known through the world as the God of Israel who's residing in Jerusalem. They will know him through that. You cannot separate God from Jerusalem. You cannot say, well, we'll just give away Jerusalem for peace. You're separating part of who God is if you're trying to do that. This is really about God asking us, who do you say that I am? People will have to choose who God is. Is he the God of Israel, or is he some lesser version? Will you choose the God of Israel? Will you love who he loves? Will you stand with who he loves, even when it becomes difficult? And that is the era I think that we are in now. I think we are in the era where it's going to become more difficult to stand with Israel, to love who he loves. The world tries to erase what it doesn't like about God. It doesn't like, that God is a holy God. It doesn't like that God is a pure God. So they try to talk only about the things about God that they like. And they don't like that God is the God of Israel. This choice is really about choosing what God chooses. It's really about who God is. It is really about understanding who I am. God speaks about refining us through fire, and he's offering us a choice. Will we choose God and everything he is, even when we have to stand in the fire? Thank you very much.